moral theory. And Bentham's idea, his essential idea, is a very simple one, with a lot of morally intuitive appeal. Bentham's idea is the following: the right thing to do, the just thing to do, is to maximize utility. What did he mean by utility? He meant by utility the balance of pleasure over pain, happiness over suffering. Here's how he arrived at the principle of maximizing utility. He started out by observing that all of us, all human beings, are governed by two sovereign masters, pain and pleasure. We human beings like pleasure and dislike pain. And so we should base morality, whether we're thinking about what to do in our own lives, or whether as legislators or citizens we're thinking about what the laws should be. The right thing to do, individually or collectively, is to maximize, act in a way that maximizes the overall level of happiness. Bentham's utilitarianism is sometimes summed up with the slogan, "the greatest good for the greatest number." With this basic principle of utility on hand, let's begin to test it and to examine it by turning to another case, another story, but this time not a hypothetical story, a real-life story, the case of the Queen versus Dudley and Stevens. This was a 19th century British law case that's famous and much debated in law schools. Here's what happened in the case. I'll summarize the story, then I want to hear how you would rule, imagining that you're the jury. A newspaper account of the time described the background. A sadder story of disaster at sea was never told than that of the survivors of the yacht Mignonette. The ship foundered in the South Atlantic, 1,300 miles from the Cape. There were 4 in the crew. Dudley was the captain. Stevens was the first mate. Brooks was a sailor. All men of excellent character, or so the newspaper account tells us. The 4th crew member was the cabin boy, Richard Parker, 17 years old. He was an orphan. He had no family. And he was on his first long voyage at sea. He went, the news account tells us, rather against the advice of his friends. He went in the hopefulness of youthful ambition, thinking the journey would make a man of him. Sadly, it was not to be. The facts of the case were not in dispute. A wave hit the ship, and the Mignonette went down. The 4 crew members escaped to a lifeboat. The only food they had were 2 cans of preserved turnips, no fresh water. For the first 3 days, they ate nothing. On the 4th day, they opened one of the cans of turnips and ate it. The next day, they caught a turtle. Together with the other can of turnips, the turtle enabled them to subsist for the next few days, and then for 8 days, they had nothing. No food, no water. Imagine yourself in a situation like that. What would you do? Here's what they did. By now, the cabin boy, Parker, is lying at the bottom of the lifeboat in the corner because he had drunk seawater against the advice of the others, and he had become ill, and he appeared to be dying. So on the 19th day, Dudley, the captain, suggested that they should all have a lottery, that they should draw lots to see who would die to save the rest. Brooks refused. he didn't like the lottery idea. We don't know whether this was because he didn't want to take the chance or because he believed in categorical moral principles. But in any case, no lots were drawn. The next day, there was still no ship in sight, so Dudley told Brooks to avert his gaze, and he motioned to Stevens that the boy Parker had better be killed. Dudley offered a prayer. He told the boy his time had come, and he killed him with a penknife, stabbing him in the jugular vein. Brooks emerged from his conscientious objection to share in the gruesome bounty. For 4 days, the three of them fed on the body and blood of the cabin boy. True story. And then they were rescued. Dudley describes their rescue in his diary with staggering euphemism, quote, "On the 24th day, as we were having our breakfast, a ship appeared at last. The three survivors were picked up by a German ship. They were taken back to Falmouth in England, where they were arrested and tried. Brooks turned state's witness. Dudley and Stevens went to trial. They didn't dispute the facts. They claimed they had acted out of necessity. That was their defense. They argued, in effect, better that one should die so that three could survive. The prosecutor wasn't swayed by that argument. He said murder is murder, and so the case went to trial. Now imagine you are the jury, and just to simplify the discussion, put aside the question of law, and let's assume that you as the jury are charged with deciding whether what they did was morally permissible or not. How many would vote not guilty, that what they did was morally permissible? And how many would vote guilty, what they did was morally wrong? A pretty sizable majority. Now let's see what people's reasons are, and let me begin with those who are in the minority. Let's hear first from the defense of Dudley and Stevens. Why would you morally exonerate them? What are your reasons? Yes?
I think it is morally reprehensible, but I think that there's a distinction between what's morally reprehensible and what makes someone legally accountable. In other words, as the judge said, what's always moral isn't necessarily against the law, and while I don't think that necessity justifies theft or murder or any illegal act, at some point your degree of necessity does in fact exonerate you from any guilt.
Okay, good. Other defenders, other voices for the defense, moral justifications for what they did. Yes?
All right, thank you. I just feel like in a situation that desperate, you have to do what you have to do to survive.
You have to do what you have to do.
You got to do what you got to do, pretty much. If you've been going 19 days without any food, someone just has to take the sacrifice. Someone has to make the sacrifice, and people can survive. Right. And furthermore, from that, let's say they survive, and then they become productive members of society who go home and start like 1 million charity organizations and this and that and this and that. I mean, they benefit everybody in the end.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I don't know what they did afterwards. They might have gone and kill more people, whatever. But
what? What if they went home and they turned out to be assassins?
What if they weren't going home and turned out to be assassins? Well,
you'd want to know who they assassinated.
That's true, too. That's fair. That's fair.
Okay.
I don't want to know who they assassinated.
All right, that's good. What's your name?
Marcus.
Marcus. All right. We've heard a defense, a couple of voices for the defense. Now we need to hear from the prosecution. Most people think what they did was wrong. Why? Yes.
One of the first things that I was thinking was, if they haven't been eating for a really long time, maybe they're mentally affected, and so then that could be used as a defense, a possible argument that they weren't in the proper state of mind, they weren't making decisions they might otherwise be making. And if that's an appealing argument, that you have to be in an altered mindset to do something like that, it suggests that people who find that argument convincing do think that they were acting immorally.
But I want to know what you think. You defend them. You vote. You vote to convict, right?
Yeah, I don't think that they acted in a morally appropriate way.
And why not? What do you say? Here's Marcus. He just defended them. He said, you heard what he said.
Yes.
That
yes.
that you've got to do what you've got to do in a case like that.
Yeah.
What do you say to Marcus?
That there's no situation that would allow human beings to take the idea of fate or that the other people's lives in their own hands, that we don't have that kind of power.
Good. Okay. Thank you. And what's your name?
Britt.
Britt?
Yes.
Okay. Who else? What do you say? Stand up.
I'm wondering if Dudley and Stephen had asked for Richard Parker's consent in, dying, if that would that exonerate them from an act of murder? And if so, is that still morally justifiable?
That's interesting. All right. Consent. Wait. Hang on. What's your name?
Kathleen.
Kathleen says, suppose they had asked, what would that scenario look like? So in the story, Dudley is there, penknife in hand, but instead of the prayer, or before the prayer, he says, Parker, would you mind? We're desperately hungry, as Marcus empathizes with. We're desperately hungry. You're not going to last long anyhow.
Yeah. You can be a martyr.
Would you be a martyr?
Yeah.
How about it, Parker? Then what do you think? Would it be morally justified then? Suppose Parker, in his semi-stupor, says, okay.
I don't think it would be morally justifiable, but I'm wondering...
Even then it wouldn't be.
No.
You don't think that even with consent, it would be morally justified. Are there people who think, who want to take up Kathleen's consent idea and who think that that would make it morally justified? Raise your hand if it would, if you think it would. That's very interesting. Why would consent make a moral difference? Why would it? Yes.
Well, I just think that if he was making his own original idea and it was his idea to start with, then that would be the only situation in which I would see it being appropriate in any way. Because that way you couldn't make the argument that he was pressured, it's 3-to-1 or whatever the ratio was.
Right.
And I think that if he was making a decision to give his life, then he took on the agency to sacrifice himself, which some people might see as admirable, and other people might disagree with that decision.
So if he came up with the idea, that's the only kind of consent we could have confidence in morally, then it would be okay. Otherwise, it would be kind of coerced consent under the circumstances, you think. Is there anyone who thinks that even the consent of Parker would not justify